Police officers who have arrested other police officers. What's the story? My dad was the arresting officer of an undercover narcotics detective for the murder of 2 fellow officers. From what I remember, the 2 officers and a technician caught him by surprise while he was stealing from an evidence room. He shot the 2 officers first and his firearm jammed, so the technician escaped. Detective got life in prison and died there. Like, what was his plan? Even if he killed the 3rd guy, they would still know who did it. It's not like he would have gotten away. Easier to sprinkle something on them when you do it inside the evidence locker. Though, yeah, I caught these 3 red-handed with 4 grenades, 30 kilos of blow and 4 dozen rapes. Kits. Rape kits. Apostrophe. Probationary officer goes on a blind double date with his roommate. Been at the racetrack drinking, so they take the train to downtown. Everyone is pretty drunk, him in particular, maybe to entertain or show off for his date. He is acting goofy as everyone is getting off the train. He sees some guy bent over tying his shoes. Rocket scientist decides to leapfrog over the guy, only neither of them have much balance. Probationary cop basically jumps over / on the guy and drives his face straight into the pavement because he is too drunk and the guy wasn't expecting it. Everyone jumps up and he starts trying to defuse the situation he just caused. Turns out the guy is a 17-year-old kid heading down to spend the weekend with his grandparents and has 2 broken teeth and a broken nose. The drunk cop starts saying stuff like, "It's okay. It will be fine. I'm a cop. It's all good." When he realizes the crowd isn't going to let him just walk away, he foot bails and tries to run off. A few guys chase him down and grab him. Cops get called and detain him. I was the on-call detective who was called out at 22:30 to handle the case. He refused to answer any questions and was booked in for felony battery based on the extent of injuries and age of victim. He never made it off probation and resigned. Edit. Since I saw this asked, I figured I would clarify. I wrote up and submitted the packet to the DA for prosecution. Nothing was swept under the rug. Trust me, a guy like this is not wanted on the police department. He was a probationary officer, so it would be easier to terminate him. The case was put through the system by the DA and he ultimately took a plea deal. A plea deal is very common across the entire spectrum of cases, whether it be a vandalism, theft of $1 billion, drug charges or murder. It is probably the most commonly used tool for adjudicating cases. So don't think a plea deal was arranged because he had been a cop. Remember, he was arrested and charged by the same department he was a probationary officer for. What a ducking idiot. Alcohol is a hell of a drug. Not me, but my dad, who was a cop. He was still working as a full-time cop before switching full-time to firefighting and made a traffic stop around 11 at night back in the mid-80s. Nicer car, speeding well over the speed limit, so my dad initiates a stop. Before he is out of his cruiser, the driver has what looks like a badge hanging out of the window. My dad walks up, does the usual song and dance, and the driver said, "You obviously can't ducking see who I am." My dad says, "Yes, Lieutenant Colonel, I do, and right now I'm conducting a traffic stop." Turns out the driver was a lieutenant colonel in the Ohio State Highway Patrol, which is pretty high up in their rank structure. My dad again asks him for license and insurance, and the guy goes off, threatening to call Dick, as in Dick Sellers, who was governor at the time, and threatening his job, that he was just trying to get back to Columbus after an engagement and so on. Eventually he calls for backup and has another officer there to witness what was going on. Eventually my dad writes him a ticket, and while still screaming, "Mr. Pulling rank," drives away. The next shift my dad gets called in by his assistant chief and is asked about the stop, and apparently the colonel of OSHP was calling him about it. In the end they had to bring in the other officer to write a statement of what went on, and in the end nothing came of it, except the ticket wasn't contested and paid. More cops need to enforce speed limits on each other. It really pisses me off when I see cop cars speeding past me with no lights on when it's clear they aren't going on a call. They're just driving. It's much less common where I'm now, Washington, than it was in the South, where I'm from. Not a police officer, but I worked as a contractor for a law enforcement digital evidence lab. There was a new guy who had just retired as a cop, but came on because he wanted to do computer forensics and supposedly had some background in it. We were in training together learning about cell phone forensics when he missed a day of training. That night he was on the news because he had been arrested after cops closed in on him for soliciting texts or pictures from underage girls. We weren't part of the investigation, but did send his work computer over to the lab that was working on it, and he had porn on it. Overall we were all shocked, but also couldn't not chuckle at the irony that he was a Compat 6 forensics analyst who didn't know how to hide evidence on a computer. Some people are thinking, oh, and how should evidence be hidden on a computer? Real answer is don't. You won't be good enough. There is a tool for catching or uncovering whatever you're thinking of doing, and if it doesn't exist now, they can hold your shit as evidence in an ongoing investigation until a tool can be devised. Best practices to not commit any crimes. But if you must commit a crime, no computer is in any way your friend. Best chance would be to commit your crime alone, in remote wilderness, at night, deep in a cave, under a blanket of leaves, with no possessions of any kind, including the possessions of others, within a 10-mile radius of you. The single week I had going over computer and network security, I learned that there is absolutely no way to hide anything anywhere unless you have physical access to all systems and servers involved. A professional gets paid to do this hacker/it engineer and capable of destroying all physical storage mediums beyond the point of turning them to ash. And yes, I mean physical access to all systems, including whatever server/cloud-based computer you needed to access in the first place. I actually have had to arrest 3 separate members of the justice system this year. First, a practicing lawyer and former judge who had been utilizing his position to coerce sex from defendants. He utilized this leverage even after he was not a judge anymore. Investigation by 601 revealed he had about a dozen victims, so a warrant for his arrest was made, which I executed. Arresting a guy you used to put defendants in front of is a very odd feeling. He weaseled out of prison time and got it all suspended and put on a direct supervision probation program. Absolute horseshit. I've seen guys do way less get way more time. But it's not really a secret that money has a habit of tipping the scales of justice. Next was a prison guard whom strangled his girlfriend, then stalked her relentlessly. I actually arrested him twice because after he posted bail on the first one he was spotted lurking outside her home only 45 minutes after being released. He's currently in on felony assault, strangulation of a household member, and felony violation of a protection order. He's still in my jail awaiting trial with a bail that has been substantially increased. I'm anticipating prison time for him, but only time will tell. Third was a city police officer. I'm a county deputy sheriff because we received a call from a 6-year-old that his dad was in the garage doing drugs and wouldn't come out. Showed up to find 4 very young kids running around unsupervised. It was a city police officer smoking meth that he had confiscated during a traffic stop and not reported or turned into evidence. 601 took the case from us due to potential conflict of interest and have placed him in another county's jail, and I haven't heard any more about it. Hope he does time too. What kind of a hole leaves his little kids totally alone and unsupervised while they smoke meth? Especially when said person is a fucking cop. Unforgivable in my opinion. Yeah. 2020 has been a very strange year for me. Wow, very similar thing happened to a judge in Nashville too. He even went so far as to make a call to let a personal acquaintance out of holding, who then went back to the wife who reported him and almost beat her to death. Wow. I'm from Nashville. I never heard of this. Locked up one for a DUI. Dude was passed out in his car at a red light. He worked for my department. I knew him, but not too well. Came up to me and apologized a few months later, which I didn't expect. Nice enough fella. Good ending. Get a call one night about a domestic. Upon arrival, this woman was bleeding heavily from her face. Said her boyfriend was a cop and he was in the next room. We talked to him and he tells us to how she deserved it. Had to use force on him and get him in custody. Guy had close to 8 years on. Fired on the spot by IAD when they arrived. Fuck him. I have no sympathy for women beaters. This is so common here in Brazil. It's so sad. The military police ignores whatever crimes their policemen commit, and the story only ends when the abused woman ends up dead. Oh, not only in Brazil. I'm a cop for a medium-sized city PD. I have arrested 2 officers for Aui, 1 from my department. I arrested an LT for domestic assault, and 1 more officer for retail fraud. Never faced any backlash. Wasn't fired or written up. Aui, operating while intoxicated. Similar to a DUI. I'm guessing different jurisdictions use different names/acronyms for the same thing. Not me but an uncle. Arrested an officer from another city for drunk driving, claiming to be the head of that city's police department. Head of the offending officer is my other uncle, first uncle's brother, who was actually sitting in my uncle's patrol car before the off-duty police officer was tagged. Ex-sheriff's deputy here. One night on shift I had the great misfortune to overhear on the radio that a small local chief of police, the whole department was only 3 people, was not answering a radio call. So my shift partner goes out to the call that they were trying to get him to go to, and I make my way to try and locate this chief of police. On my way to the police station thinking maybe he's just asleep on the couch, I see his squad car pulled off onto the side of the road, lights going. In that moment my heart sank. My first thought was, oh no, this dude just got killed on a traffic stop. As I'm walking up to the car in a hurry, I noticed that he slumped over. I reached into the open driver's window and grabbed his shoulder to try and put my fingers against his neck to feel if he has a pulse or if his skin is still warm, and generally check to see if he is in fact still alive. As I'm doing this, I notice a distinct and strong odor of alcohol. As the chief of police wakes up, looks at me, puts the car in drive and pulls away. About that time another deputy pulls up behind my car, and I put out my radio that the chief is driving off. The other deputy, forgetting that we all use a shared frequency, then comes over the radio and says hey, he should be easy to follow, his lights are on. The lights go off. Fast forward to several hours later. Command staff is out at the police department, seizing the weapons and evidence that's stored within the department. This chief of police shows up with the mayor of the small town and submits himself to a breathalyzer. He barely passes. Fun fact: district attorneys do not like prosecuting chiefs of police, especially when politics are starting to get involved. Unrelated to that, I was let go about 2 weeks later for calling a suspect an butthole. Unprofessional conduct. How long ago was this? Way back in 2010. Fuck, it's been a long time. I arrested 4 separate officers during my career. All 4 were sex crimes. To be fair, special victims were my forte and internal investigations fell under my title, so it just shook out that way. Thank you for working in that field. I know it's very difficult. It was challenging and rewarding. Not a police officer, but am a nurse and work in Takota County Jail, and I've mostly seen officers arrested for domestic violence and DUI. I also worked with a deputy who was arrested for human trafficking. He'll never understand human trafficking. Sure, it's lucrative, but you have to be seriously depraved or emotionally dead to sell a person. I'm emotionally dead and would never sell a person. It's seriously disgusting. So please don't lump me in with that. Can't go into much detail, but had to book an officer in for taking his female roommate's phone and sending her nudes to his own phone. He then threatened to leak them unless she did sexual favors for him, but she called it in instead. Edit: this really blew up for me, so thank you, kind soul, for the silver. I would also like to apologize for spelling and grammar mistakes. It's definitely not my strongest subject. Brave woman. She asked the police to send dudes. Not me but my brother. There have been a couple of DUIs that he's arrested other cops for, and a fine issued against a cop throwing a house party during lockdown. The most interesting, stupid on the part of the other cop, was arresting a cop for assaulting a police officer. If you're a cop, don't go to a club and get drunk enough to lamp your own sergeant in the face when he's on duty and there to break up the fight you are already in. It won't end well for you. If you're too drunk to recognize your boss, being arrested will probably save you from liver failure. I've been a half bottle deep into Jack Daniels and still saw my boss coming across the hotel lobby. I used to travel for a living. From what I was told, he recognized him. He just decided it would be a good idea to punch him anyway, in front of 3 other cops, 2 of which he worked with, 1 of which was my brother. So you can imagine how well that went for him. My cousin was local PD and told me a story about a fellow officer who was molesting his stepdaughter, 11 years old. They asked who was going to arrest him and all of the local PD officers refused, my cousin included. They had to call in the state police after the sheriff's department also refused to arrest. My cousin didn't understand my outrage at the story. Sounds about right. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe for more videos.